Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Bottom Line. I'm your host, Lauren Khalil. Our show is brought to you by Vouri. I have an unhealthy amount of joggers, and Vouri's performance joggers take the cake as the softest, most comfortable pants that I can work out in, lounge in, or honestly just go out in public in. Make sure to check out the description below for 20% off of your first purchase. On today's show, we have Brian Friend and Tommy Marquez here to discuss the recent news of Nycolas Joyal coming forward and admitting to using a banned substance. Tommy, you've been covering athletes testing positive for banned substances for essentially the lifespan of competitive CrossFit. Does it surprise you that we still see athletes testing positive, especially when the qualifiers know that they'll be tested at these competitions?
No, not at all. I mean, you look at the history of sports in general, as long as there's something to be gained and you consider the fact that performance enhancing drugs, in fact, do work, there's going to be people that, for various reasons, and it's going to be scattered across the board why, but to the same effect of trying to get better. And um, they're going to go to those lengths to try and improve at times. And I think you look at sports that have been around, you know, three times, four times, five times as long as the sport of fitness, and we still see that. Now, I think you have to differentiate what the intention is, or not necessarily the intention, but in other sports you have these lucrative contracts and things like that, and the difference between generational wealth and having to find a different career is the difference maker in those decisions, where it might be slightly different and maybe a more personal decision, but it's going to happen regardless. And I don't think that's something that's really going to change throughout sport even as we move forward.
When we look at Nicholas and his specific situation, he came forward first. We have yet, at the time of this recording, heard CrossFit announce anything. It was Nicholas who informed us that he said he was taking a banned substance for at least 2 weeks. Brian, why do you think that him testing positive? What do you think it tells us about the sport, and especially the style in which he announced it?
I think it says kind of more about him than anything. If it sounds like, I mean, I know he went on Savant's podcast and talked for a long time about what this experience has been like for him, and it just sounds like it's been weighing heavy on him, and that's understandable. But it also seems like this is something that he's been considering for a while. He kind of alludes to the fact that he's been competitive and close, but he just hasn't been able to achieve the things he wanted. And I've always thought that those are the people that are most likely to take this kind of a risk. So it's not surprising to hear that someone who thinks he's almost there would, finally break down and make a decision that he knows is against his better judgment, but that is going to help him potentially get what he wants. But at the end of the day, I don't think this is what he wanted, and so it probably wasn't worth it.
Do either of you think that that's kind of the mindset of people who are right on the bubble of making it to the games, that maybe they think other athletes are taking banned substance and that's the only option that they have? Do you think that it's kind of just this mindset at that point in the game?
I think it can be. I think Nicholas's admission and explanation of his particular mindset, I think, gives a good clue into the ups and downs of an athlete, particularly in this sport, as someone who's trying to break through. So much of what we see, we can go deeper on this, of the Instagram lifestyle of seeing highlights and ups and triumphs all the time. If you're an athlete that is on the fringe and has been trying for quite some time, and you've exhausted what you feel like is all these options, and you are having a hard time coming to grips with maybe that you're consistently coming up short, desperation causes people to do a lot of things, not just in sports. And I think that more often than not, that you can tap into any sort of discussion online that you choose to find, and you will see people saying that, hey, everyone's doing it, or the only way to get through is to do this. And it's very easy as an athlete in a certain state of mind to be influenced by that. So I certainly think that there is a pervasive thought that a lot of people are doing it already, and that can wear on someone for sure.
I just kind of add to the kind of silver lining of this situation is that the likely fallout of this is that another athlete who's actually in a pretty similar situation in Austin Spencer, who has been close for many years. I think he missed by one spot all the way back in 2018 when we still had regionals, and he's just continued to grind. And he came up he thought short again this year, but the decision not to give into that temptation might actually pay off for him. And so on the, you can kind of see that, whether you believe in karma or things like that, doing the right thing over a period of time, even though it's a hard road to hoe sometimes. In the case of an Austin Spencer, if this ends up going, well for him, he's a great example of the testament to hard work over time actually being a payoff.
Yeah, and not just that. I mean, so it's actually even a year longer than that. It was 2017 at the East Regional that he finished sixth behind Michael Palumbo by just 5 points, and it was this crazy fight. Like last workout, he beat him by one spot, like kind of ups and downs, heartbreaking type finish. And then over then, he consistently was kind of on the bubble. You go back to 2019. I was down there in Brazil with him when he made the top 8, but finished just a couple of spots away. And we weren't really sure how the backfill process was going to work. And so he was kind of painstakingly close again. And then he comes back this year and finishes sixth. And in that process, I think they're married now, or they're engaged. Carolyn Connors has now qualified 2 years in a row. So in the midst of him coming up painstakingly short, he's watched, his loved one go on to elevate herself to a games athlete. And, I'm sure he's stoked for her and everything like that. But you have to acknowledge that in the mindset of an athlete, you hope that maybe you could be there joining with them. And now I think we've seen some of the responses from Carolyn online and some other people that they might actually get to enjoy that together.
And then do we know, I mean, the testing process right now, there's still semifinals where we haven't seen the results yet. They're still going through. It's kind of this tedious process. Do we know that Austin was tested while he was at the Atlas Games too?
Typically, they will test down to 7th or 8th spots, depending on the year. And they usually test below that in case someone does pop. And they have a clean bill of record, I guess, for people that would be in line to backfill. I believe they tested down through 7th place this year.
It was 7th for the teams and 8th for the individuals.
8th for the men, yeah. And so they, so he should, so assuming he passes his tests, then he should be good to go.
But there are other semifinals that we are still waiting on. What do you guys think that says about, I mean, we're just a couple weeks leading up to the games. What does that say as we anticipate to see really what the full field is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's a timeline thing. Getting those drug test results takes a lot longer than most people think is appropriate. But like you said, it's a tedious process, and some of that is outside of CrossFit's control. And my assumption, Tommy might know more about this, is like the faster you want it, the more expensive it is, and it's a lot of drug tests that they're waiting to come back. But you do have an example of last year where Laurie Kuna's drug test came back really close to the games, and there was no chance to backfill that spot. And that's kind of the thing that you don't want to happen. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to at least get the initial semifinal results back in a timely enough manner that if there is someone else like Austin Spencer that would be in line to get that opportunity, that they actually have enough time to offer that other athlete the same chance.
Brian's right about that. It's kind of a sliding scale, right? The more extensive of testing and the more you do it, the faster you want it, the more expensive it is. It kind of goes back to that rule of 2 between cheap, fast, and good. You can only get 2. If you want it fast and good, it's not going to be cheap, and every other iteration of that. But and they were taking, I know for some athletes they were taking blood samples as well, and that starts to add to pile up to what is going to be a more extensive process as well. The general sentiment has always been, if you're in that 6th spot, particularly sometimes in the 7th, you got to stay ready. As much as it may sting coming up close, you always got to kind of keep the engine at least in neutral a little bit.
Sure. And making a little bit of a transition, we also have another athlete that just came forward just a couple of minutes ago today, Mike Kratos. He's been in the sport for a while. He's another athlete that tested positive. This one on a team, though, who competed at strength and depth. Joyal, he's been the only individual that we've heard of that has tested positive, where it seems like there are more teams getting those positive tests in the space. Do you think that there is a specific reason why more people on teams versus individuals are testing positive?
I mean, a lot of this is speculation, right? But I think you have athletes in the team competition that year to year aren't as necessarily dedicated to the year-round process of being a games athlete, if that makes sense. You have a lot of athletes that are training hard, working hard, trying to get better. And then year to year, they don't know what their competitive landscape might be. And then, as we've seen in this last couple of years, teams come together very quickly, right? Rosters come together, you fill out people. And you've heard the stories from people that saying, hey, I wasn't expecting to compete this year. And then suddenly a team came together and I did. I don't know if that's necessarily the case for a lot of them. But I also think that there is a different level of commitment. And that's not saying anything against those team athletes. But I think if you're a perennial individual athlete, there's a certain broader attention to detail, if that makes sense, that I think some of the individual athletes might go through that some of the other team, because you're in the team competition and publicly it's maybe seen as like a half click below the individual competition in terms of money and in terms of attention and things like that, that you may just think, oh, okay, maybe I don't need to be as prudent in everything that I do.
Yeah, I mean, Rich Froning's a perfect example of that. He's obviously been able to continue to compete at a high level on the teams, and he doesn't think that he has the space in his life to give what needs to be at the same level as an individual. And I think, for the numbers people out there, you could say, well, there's 4 times as many people on a team as there are individuals. So if we have 5 team people fail and 1 individual, then it's kind of in proportion. But that's not necessarily the case, because if I'm not mistaken, they're only testing 1 male and 1 female on each of the teams. So there's a little bit of a randomization there. So it is a higher percentage of team athletes that are, at least this year, failing drug tests relative to the individuals that we know so far. And I think that, Tommy's points are all extremely valid as to why that might be.
Tommy, what's your bottom line?
I would say my bottom line is this is kind of in line with what we've seen. If you look at both the numbers of people popping up here or there, the substances that are showing up in people's tests, as metabolic modulators have kind of become the choice. And the bottom line is that I hope people learn from it.
Brian, what's your bottom line?
I would say it's kind of threefold. One is, CrossFit seems to be doing a great job in this regard this year of making sure that the process is thorough and that these people who make these, take these risks and make these decisions are not getting away with it. And, if you do choose to do so, you have to know that it's going to be a tough road to hoe if you end up getting caught. And then lastly is, I think that a lot of people can walk away from this and look at Austin Spencer, like Tommy said, assuming that he is competing clean, as a really good example of the way to go about your business over a long period of time in this sport to try to get to where you want to be.
Tommy Marquez, Brian Friend, thank you guys so much. We'll see you next time.